This is Tell Me Exactly, an emergency communications podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Jensen. I've got more than 15 years experience in public safety, starting out as a call taker, moving into quality assurance and training, and now I serve with the Priority Dispatch implementations team as an EDQ protocol and software expert. On Tell Me Exactly, I invite experts from Priority Dispatch and the International Academies of Emergency Dispatch to talk to me about all things related to emergency communications centers. Today we're talking about how the phrase, "Tell me exactly what happened," came to be. We're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Jeff J. Clawson.
Pleasure to be here, Meredith. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. I'm so excited that you are joining me for this episode. And I couldn't be happier that you decided to spend some time and talk to us.
Well, as it should be. That's the plan.
Yeah. So now I just kind of want to get right to it. And I would love to hear the story from you about tell me exactly what happened. How did that phrase come to be? I can't wait to hear it.
Well, it is a long story, actually. Hopefully it won't take that long to tell it. But my first experience in dispatch came when I was working during my medical school years as an EMT at Gold Cross Ambulance in Salt Lake. And whoever was closest to the telephone in the main office where most of the billing was done, picked up the phone. Once that was done, most of us that were picking up the phone were also the folks that manned the ambulance. So we went to the ambulance. As we were going out, flipped a switch at the garage door that moved the dispatch radio and stuff to either the base station for someone else to pick up who was there, or to the home during off hours of the ambulance company owners. It was really truly a ma and pa ambulance situation. And picking up the phone, you said Gold Cross Ambulance, and that was about it. We didn't say what was your emergency because the vast majority of them were transports, not emergencies, as time went on. So that's my first experience. Not exactly, rocket science stuff in dispatch. Having then jumping some years forward to the fire department as the medical director, writing turned out to be the first dispatch protocol system. And in the original stuff that came out in 1979, all we did is we said determine after address and phone number verification, find out what the chief complaint is. That was the extent of it. So that in and of itself was supposed to work. Unfortunately, that everybody had a different way of saying something like that. What's up? Tell me what happened. What is your emergency? Anything across the board. And over the course of the next several years, we started to develop the process of what's the problem. And those, if anybody's still alive from the 80s other than me, will remember that there was in the old card sets, the old metal card sets, not a case entry card. And matter of fact, we called case entry the invisible protocol, meaning you had to memorize it.
Wow.
And that was, what's the problem? And then the standard stuff that's currently there. Although we didn't usually ask the party of the caller. That was known because in card sets, it doesn't affect you. If you know it, you just do it as you're reading it to in essence, create the right the right pronouns, etc. So that hadn't come to be yet. But conscious and breathing, the 4 commandments were in essence what we did. That persisted for a long time. Then with version 10 of the protocol, which was 1990, we included then a full, it was under development through, I think, late 8 and 9, but the first time I can formally say I know it was there, without going back to the archive, was 1990, version 10.0. What's the problem? Then later on, we started to ask, what's the problem? Tell me exactly what happened. And that could have been that early. I'm working out of home right now, so since you did the podcast, I haven't been able to get to the major archive and go back and get date and time. So it could have been even that we had, what's the problem? Tell me exactly what happened, as early as 90.
Okay.
That then maintained as the standard for quite some time. And it wasn't until we began the standards-based process this time of creating fire in the year 2000 and police in 2001 that the issue started to raise its head about saying, what's the problem? Tell me exactly what happened. And on the police side, it was felt that this was kind of redundant and also not exactly right for how the folks that were experts in the area thought it should be. And to try to, because the push to get fire and police actually came from accredited centers that said, I remember getting a call from a guy in Maryland, which has one of the best state-based EMS and EMD services in the country, if not the world. They said, "Hey Doc, I'm a tri-dispatcher. I do police, fire, medical. Take a medical call. I have my green hat on, put my green hat on. I have a protocol. I have software. I have training. I have certification. I have recertification. I have continuing dispatch things that I learn all the time that come out from the academy. And we're an ace." Next call comes in, police or fire. Majority of them were police. I then switch hat colors, and there is absolutely none of the above. I am left to wing it. So trying to use my knowledge, I do, but we really need structured call taking for fire and police. We've been thinking about it for the first 10 years, but just thought that wasn't in the wheelhouse of what we were doing. And we were learning, more about structured call taking and finding out that structured call taking actually works if you're ordering from McDonald's, so you end up getting the right stuff and recording things and having a system that doesn't rely on how you feel when you wake up in the morning. I wake up and I have a headache, I have a hangover, I had a bad night in my other job. Now I've got to start making it up, and even myself then wouldn't be the same on any given call, because you would modify it based on kind of how it flowed for you.
Right.
But not only was there inconsistency among dispatchers, there were inconsistency of the dispatcher. At one point, when I was in Salt Lake, with the approval of the chief, we were able to call in faking a chest pain call to the comm center at different times during the day. Got different dispatchers, even the same dispatcher, and every single interrogation was different, every single one of them.
Wow.
That was in the late 70s, sort of showing this is what goes on without having structure. Now, you might say, the structure you chose was bad, but we had one.
Right.
So then we started to think about the modification of structure. And the modification of structure then is the scientific method. What have we learned since? What have we learned from calls? What have we learned from studies? What have we learned from bad experiences that we fold into the protocol to make it help everyone, so that everybody, as we used to say, doesn't have to trip over the same dead body before they learn that that's not the way to do it. Given back now to the police, fire, and medical thing, discussions started to be held in the academy process between the standards councils. Because in this particular case, we started by forming a standards council, and then for fire and for police, and having it the experts create it. It wasn't me playing amateur hour as the medical director, doing whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted to do it. And so there was structure, there was discussion, there was debate, there was input, and that created then light years faster what we were going to do with police and fire.
Yeah.
And anybody will know. I mean, if anybody saw the protocols back then, draft one, version one, I used to say I wouldn't touch it with a 20-foot pike pole and rubber gloves in my fire experience, because draft one is never where it's going to be. And that's the beauty of evolution, is it creates more and more complexity that lives, complexity that works. If the complexity doesn't work, then the organism dies.
Right.
And they don't get to pass on their bad genes. So that's how evolution works. And that's what we try to replicate with what we're doing. Again, we created it was a cross-discipline meeting among the major players in the standards groups. Usually that was the chair of the standards council, and possibly, depending on what it was, the chair of the curriculum council out of the board for that particular discipline, and elected to do away with what's the problem and just say, tell me exactly what happened, which seemed, I'm sometimes a little allergic to change, like anybody,
Sure.
So we started watching it and listening to it. Sounded pretty good. Funny thing is, everybody was incorrect in following protocol. Everybody. Because you know what they did?
They went back to old habits.
No, this is what they did. No, they didn't go back to old habits.
Okay.
They said, okay, tell me
Ah.
exactly what happened. We heard that so often because it's a natural segue, just having verified the telephone number that was originally received was correct. And that it's not only a segue, it's an affirmation. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Okay, now, if you could say that, you could say, okay, now I heard that a lot. Tell me exactly what happened. Even more of a segue, if you will. But we said, let's just put it in the protocol. And I actually wrote an article once because sometimes some of the QA people were dinging people for not saying okay. We said, no, we have a best way, but it's not the almighty perfect way on this. So if they said okay now, or please now, or hey Bob, tell me exactly what happened, those are colloquialisms that we're not worried about. I mean, especially if you listen to it and say, boy, that sounds good, that makes sense. So we didn't want to be, beating people with a stick for adding in words. And that's an interesting part of the evolution of that it could have been anything, but or it could have been nothing, but we decided to put that in. It reminds me of an earlier time when we did that, which was at the end of a childbirth call, where the dispatcher often said, because these tend to turn out okay most of the time. It's a happy ending. Happy ending. Well, is it a boy or a girl?
Yeah.
So we put that in the protocol.
I remember when that was in there.
It was in the protocol. We actually added another one, the very first subject matter expert that joined me in the original PDC Academy stuff was a guy named Scott Howard. His picture's in the front of the book. And he was doing the implementation in Cleveland, Ohio for EMD. And he lived there. We used to have the implementers often, for a big one, lived in that city. Mm-hmm. I remember he was in Montreal for, I think, 6 weeks. And so he had been, he's just a real confident guy. He'd said, well, I'm going to come over tonight and dispatch with you. So he'd wear a headset and he would do it. So they had a childbirth.
Okay.
And Scott took the childbirth all the way through. And when he got to the end, he said, is it a boy or a girl? And when the father, who was, you could tell was a happy camper, said, it's a boy, he said, well, are you going to name the baby after me?
And, how did that go over?
And the father said, well, what's your name? And he said, Scott. He said, I think we will.
Wow. Wow.
So
that's
for
incredible.
a while, we put that in until the grammamentarians in Australia said that was a little bit flip. So we took out,
much.
You can name the baby after me. But anyway,
I wonder if there are any babies out there named after me, because I don't remember having to give that part of the instruction.
We're as brash as Scott, and ask, but
yeah,
I just saw the tape on my desktop the other day. He died and I presented it to his kids because it was quintessential Howard.
Absolutely. That's incredible.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's some things in the protocol, I got outvoted on that one. So, the process does work. I don't get everything I want.
I remember being a dispatcher, and when that transition from what's the problem, tell me exactly what happened, to okay, tell me exactly what happened, became a thing. And I remember also sort of leaning into what you're talking about. I know as a dispatcher, I use the word okay as a transitional word. It's sort of my brain's own way to connect with the information I was just told and prepare for the next question or the next sequence. So I was really thrilled when that change happened. And I remember it making so much sense to me that it really, I think you spoke to this, but maybe speak a little more, but about the difference between what's the problem and tell me exactly what happened, searching for really the root of why are you seeking help today, right?
Right. And, something that's important, very related to what we're talking about today is there is somewhat of a problem that has to do with, every call is virtually answered in CAD. Mm-hmm. We know that.
Yeah.
And the academy's standard is you will verify the location, the alley, and the ANI telephone number, and then move on to what's the problem. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how it comes down, the caller doesn't wait for that. Mm-hmm. They're telling you what they want right off because that's probably the first thing on their mind when they call.
You bet.
For heaven's sakes. What they say can be anything. And that's one of the reasons why, the matter of fact, back to case entry, that the Academy standard is don't ask, what is your emergency as the first thing, or you get war and peace.
Right.
It's what is the address of the emergency? What is the location of the emergency? I know one of those is right. I have to look at it. I'm not following protocol, am
I? I think you're doing all right.
That's the reasoning behind that. But sometimes folks who, I know the police have a term for it, it's called an excited utterance. Somebody says something and it counts as being admissible in court, or people that say stuff like that generally are, well, not lying. They're telling it like it is. But if the initial complaint, for example, was Grandpa's dying, well, I'd say we've got one hell of a complaint here for this call.
Yeah.
And Grandpa's probably dying. But what's he dying from? We don't know that. So in essence, there's a huge difference between the complaint and the chief complaint. The
Right.
complaint is what they tell you. The chief complaint has to contain enough information to categorize it into one of the standard chief complaint protocols.
Right.
That's why tell me exactly what happened is it could be the most important question in the entire protocol. Because if you don't find out, an old professor once said, if you get on the wrong train, thinking about the old English stations like Victoria Station, everything goes out from the radius of that. If you get on the wrong train at the central station, every town you come to is the wrong town, no matter how long you stay on the damn train.
Right.
So you've got to get it right there. And that's where, as we tested one time, some number of years ago, we're going to look again I got to look again in the huge database where we have now some 40 million calls in the Academy's analytic database, that it was 15 and a half seconds was the average time a person stayed in that field in ProQA from when it popped up after, okay, tell me exactly what happened, hits the screen, which is where you open ProQA, because you've got it dumps.
Right.
Till you left, 15 and a half seconds. So that's an average. So some people are in there much shorter, some people are in there much longer. Sometimes it should be much shorter. Sometimes it needs to be longer. It needs to be what it is to get it right. So somebody once asked me, well, how much time should it take? I said, well, if I could do it all over again, go back to the very beginning of time, based on what this podcast is all about, I would modify that question yet again. And it would be this. Okay, tell me exactly what happened. I've got all the time in the world. And listen.
Oh, I love it.
And listen.
Yeah.
Don't argue. Don't talk over them. Let them tell you stuff, because often, the sum of the parts is greater than that total. So it's good to do that. It's the best time you'll ever spend on those calls. And that's why rushing is not a good idea.
Right.
I can't remember I just heard it the other day. A famous person once told somebody, maybe it was said, it's okay to be prompt, but don't hurry. And I know there's an old military phrase, say, people that hurry to their death, and you don't want to hurry right then. It's hard not to, because there's so much pressure on the emergency dispatcher. Get going. Even if it isn't being said, it's almost like it's floating in the atmosphere in the comm center.
Yeah, I felt that.
And I remember being in the first official implementation of the comm center in Clark County, Washington. It's Vancouver, Washington. And it was a center run by one of the famous people in Nina APCO history. Her name was Thera Bradshaw. She was, I think, the only person that's been president of both organizations. Absolutely a tremendous comm center manager. And they had been using the protocol since early '83. I went up and actually taught some courses for her and her compatriot up there, and came back later on, I guess must have been about 92 by then. Well, they sort of were using the protocols, sort of. They were up on top of the counter. So gathering dust, not fingerprints.
Right.
And so I kind of chided her and said, let's review some calls. And she said, how well are you doing stuff? And she said, oh, we're doing it just exactly right. I said, well, I'll come over tomorrow and we'll listen to some. It wasn't exactly right. And she said, oh my God, I'm the incoming of Nina. People are going to be coming here all the time. We got to get this right. So they reinstalled. In the morning of installation, I was there, the go live. And it was like 3 minutes to 9. She's standing there at the consoles and said, okay, everybody, listen up. I know everybody's got some concerns, what we're going to be doing and how well we're going to be doing it. But I want to say one thing. It's time we start doing it right, not just fast.
Beautiful
And I
words.
thought, wow. So we have embodied that as Bradshaw's law in textbooks, protocols, everything.
Yeah, it's very
Couldn't have said
poignant.
anything that was more valuable to doing it. The time it takes to do something is not fast, it's right. And time standards we only have in place of clinical standards. We have to do a pair of tonsil removals isn't the same as doing a heart transplant.
I would hope not.
It's not one time. So when we talk about time in case entry or time to the dispatch point, it really should be different depending on what it is, its acuity level, how difficult it is to determine what it is. All those get factored in. So that's where we sometimes lose it in terms of, well, we do lose it a lot in terms of that time, monkey that's sitting on everybody's back, virtually biting them when they don't go forward, quote, fast enough. I've got all the time in the world. Not really.
But that's how we determine how to help them best, right? And so, there's no other more important question in the protocol, in my opinion, either. So
Right.
I am so grateful that you took some time today to come and talk to us about this topic. I hope that you'll come back and join us again. What do you think?
I think it's possible.
I hope so. You have to know that I'm one of your biggest fans. I'm
Well,
sure you
I
hear
appreciate
that
that.
all the time.
Well, I am just glad I was lucky enough to be in this position, and things that happen the way they did. There's always a reason, I think, that not starting any religions based on it. So
No, but we're all lucky that you were in the position that you were in. I mean, that's the way I like to think about it. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Tell Me Exactly to get the latest information on all things emergency communications. Tell Me Exactly is a Priority Dispatch Corporation podcast developed by our team of protocol experts and is hosted by me, Meredith Jensen, with Cody Ekman as producer, Reading Roberts as sound engineer, Scott Robinson and Jason Barber as executive producers.